Hello. Tonight, we begin with the most fascinating fairy tale. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. There is no doubt about it. "That was a dreadful affair," said a hen in a distant quarter of the town, shaking her comb with self-importance. "A terrible affair, indeed, and in a respectable neighborhood, too. Such things unsettle one's sleep. I declare I shall not sit alone upon the roost tonight." It is fortunate that we hens are sociable creatures and may take comfort in one another's company. The other hens gathered close, eyes wide with curiosity, and she began to tell a tale so alarming that the feathers of her audience rose up like a storm about to burst, and the cock upon the perch dropped his proud red comb in horror. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that what she said was true. But to understand how this dreadful event came about, we must go back to the beginning, to another hen roost in another corner of the same town, just as the sun was sinking behind the thatched roofs. The fowls were fluttering up to their perches for the night. Among them was a white hen of short legs but good reputation, known for her punctuality in laying eggs and her modest, well-ordered ways. She was, in short, the model of what a respectable hen ought to be. As she flew up, she gave herself a tidy little peck just to smooth her plumage, and in doing so, a small feather came loose and drifted down through the twilight. "There it goes," she said lightly to herself. "The more I pluck, the lovelier I become." She laughed softly, for she was a cheerful soul and meant nothing by it. Then she settled her head beneath her wing and went to sleep. Now, as it often happens in the world, her nearest neighbor heard her words imperfectly, heard and half understood, as we all must, if we are to live peacefully among others. Yet the words would not leave her mind. After tossing for a while, she turned to the hen beside her and whispered, "Did you hear that? I won't mention names, of course, but there is one among us who intends to pluck out her feathers just to look pretty. If I were a cock, I should despise her." Above the fowl house sat the owl family, father, mother, and 3 solemn little owlets, for they had taken the old rafters as their home. Owls have sharp ears, and they heard every syllable. They rolled their great round eyes, and Mother Owl fluttered her wings in moral agitation. "Don't repeat it to the children," she cried. "But one must keep informed about one's neighbors. There is, I fear, a hen below who has forgotten what befits a decent bird. She is plucking herself bare, feather by feather, and flaunting before the cock." "Prenez garde aux enfants," murmured Father Owl gravely. "The little ones must not hear such wickedness." "True," said Mother Owl, "but it is my duty to tell old Mrs. Owl next door. She is so sensible, and these things must be discussed with prudence." So off she flew through the night. Two, she hooted into the neighbor's dovecote. "Have you heard? Have you heard? There's a scandal in the hen yard. A foolish hen has plucked out all her feathers to show herself to the cock. She'll freeze before morning if she hasn't frozen already." "Where? Where?" cooed the doves, flapping in confusion. "In the neighbor's yard," said the owl. "I've almost seen it myself. It is shameful to speak of, but alas, true." The doves nodded gravely and cooed down into their own poultry yard. "Something dreadful has happened next door. A hen, perhaps two, have stripped themselves bare to please the cock. A dangerous vanity. They caught cold and died of fever, poor things." "Wake up! Wake up!" crowed the cock, jumping to his perch. His eyes were still half closed, but his sense of duty was strong. "3 hens have died of foolish love. They plucked out all their feathers for the cock's sake. A tragic story. I must tell it far and wide." "Let it go farther!" screeched the bats in the rafters, delighted at the noise. And from roost to roost, from yard to yard, the tale flew faster than wings could beat. Each telling made it richer, darker, more terrible. By the time it crossed the next street, it had become 5 hens have plucked themselves to the bone to prove whose love was greatest. And in their jealousy, they pecked one another till the blood ran, and they all died, to the disgrace of their breed and the ruin of their master. At last, the rumor returned to the very coop where it had begun. The white hen, who had only lost a single feather in a moment of cheerful vanity, heard the tale with disgust. "What wicked creatures!" she exclaimed. "Such scandal must not be hidden. I shall see that the matter reaches the papers. The public ought to be warned." And so it was written, printed, and read across the land. 5 hens in one night plucked themselves bare out of vanity and perished from cold. A shocking example of moral decay in our modern poultry yards. The respectable white hen clucked her approval when she read it. "It serves them right," she said. Society must draw a line somewhere. And thus, from a single feather, there grew 5 hens, each one a little larger, a little wilder, and a little farther from the truth. A cheerful temper. From my father, I received the best inheritance, namely, a good temper. And who was my father? That has nothing to do with the good temper. But I will say he was lively, good-looking round, and fat. He was both in appearance and character, a complete contradiction to his profession. And pray, what was his profession and his standing in respectable society? Well, perhaps, if in the beginning of a book these were written and printed, many, when they read it, would lay the book down and say, "It seems to me a very miserable title. I don't like things of this sort." And yet, my father was not a skin dresser, nor an executioner. On the contrary, his employment placed him at the head of the grandest people of the town, and it was his place by right. He had to precede the bishop, and even the princes of the blood. He always went first. He was a hearse driver. There, now, the truth is out, and I will own that when people saw my father perched up in front of the omnibus of death, dressed in his long, wide, black cloak, and his black-edged, 3-cornered hat on his head, and then glanced at his round, jocund face, round as the sun, they could not think much of sorrow or the grave. That face said, "It is nothing. It will all end better than people think." So I have inherited from him not only my good temper, but a habit of going often to the churchyard, which is good when done in a proper humor. And then also I take in the Intelligencer, just as he used to do. I am not very young. I have neither wife nor children, nor a library. But as I said, I read the Intelligencer, which is enough for me. It is to me a delightful paper. And so it was to my father. It is of great use, for it contains all that a man requires to know. The names of the preachers at the church, and the new books which are published, where houses, servants, clothes, and provisions may be obtained. And then, what a number of subscriptions to charities, and what innocent verses, persons seeking interviews and engagements, all so plainly and naturally stated. Certainly, a man who takes in the Intelligencer may live merrily and be buried contentedly, and by the end of his life will have such a capital stock of paper that he can lie on a soft bed of it, unless he prefers wood shavings for his resting place. The newspaper and the churchyard were always exciting objects to me. My walks to the latter were like bathing places to my good humor. Every one can read the newspaper for himself, but come with me to the churchyard, while the sun shines and the trees are green. And let us wander among the graves. Each of them is like a closed book, with the back uppermost, on which we can read the title of what the book contains, but nothing more. I had a great deal of information from my father, and I have noticed a great deal myself. I keep it in my diary, in which I write for my own use and pleasure a history of all who lie here, and a few more beside. Now we are in the churchyard. Here, behind the white iron railings, once a rose tree grew. It is gone now, but a little bit of evergreen from a neighboring grave stretches out its green tendrils and makes some appearance. There rests a very unhappy man, and yet, while he lived, he might be said to occupy a very good position. He had enough to live upon, and something to spare. But owing to his refined tastes, the least thing in the world annoyed him. If he went to a theater of an evening, instead of enjoying himself, he would be quite annoyed if the machinist had put too strong a light into one side of the moon, or if the representations of the sky hung over the scenes when they ought to have hung behind them, or if a palm tree was introduced into a scene representing the zoological gardens of Berlin, or a cactus in a view of Tyrol, or a beech tree in the north of Norway, as if these things were of any consequence. Why did he not leave them alone? Who would trouble themselves about such trifles, especially at a comedy where everyone is expected to be amused? Then, sometimes, the public applauded too much or too little to please him. They are like wet wood, he would say, looking round to see what sort of people were present. This evening, nothing fires them. Then he would vex and fret himself because they did not laugh at the right time, or because they laughed in the wrong places. And so he fretted and worried himself till at last the unhappy man fretted himself into the grave. Here rests a happy man, that is to say, a man of high birth and position, which was very lucky for him. Otherwise, he would have been scarcely worth notice. It is beautiful to observe how wisely nature orders these things. He walked about in a coat embroidered all over, and in the drawing rooms of society looked just like one of those rich pearl-embroidered bell pulls, which are only made for show. And behind them always hangs a good, thick cord for use. This man also had a stout, useful substitute behind him, who did duty for him and performed all his dirty work. And there are still, even now, these serviceable cords behind other embroidered bell ropes. It is all so wisely arranged that a man may well be in a good humor. Here rests. It makes one feel mournful to think of him. But here rests a man who, during 67 years, was never remembered to have said a good thing. He lived only in the hope of having a good idea. At last, he felt convinced, in his own mind, that he really had one, and was so delighted that he positively died of joy at the thought of having at last caught an idea. Nobody got anything by it. Indeed, no one even heard what the good thing was. Now, I can imagine that this same idea may prevent him from resting quietly in his grave. For suppose that to produce a good effect, it is necessary to bring out his new idea at breakfast, and that he can only make his appearance on earth at midnight, as ghosts are believed generally to do. Why then this good idea would not suit the hour, and the man would have to carry it down again with him into the grave. That must be a troubled grave. The woman who lies here was so remarkably stingy that during her life she would get up in the night and mew, that her neighbors might think she kept a cat. What a miser she was. Here rests a young lady of a good family who would always make her voice heard in society. And when she sang Mi manca la voce, it was the only true thing she ever said in her life. Here lies a maiden of another description. She was engaged to be married, but her story is one of everyday life. We will leave her to rest in the grave. Here rests a widow who, with music in her tongue, carried gall in her heart. She used to go round among the families near and search out their faults, upon which she preyed with all the envy and malice of her nature. This is a family grave. The members of this family held so firmly together in their opinions that they would believe in no other. If the newspapers, or even the whole world, said of a certain subject, "It is so and so," and a little schoolboy declared he had learned quite differently, they would to take his assertion as the only true one, because he belonged to the family. And it is well known that if the yard cock belonging to this family happened to crow at midnight, they would declare it was morning, although the watchman and all the clocks in the town were proclaiming the hour of 12 at night. The great poet Goethe concludes his Faust with the words, "May be continued." So might our wanderings in the churchyard be continued. I come here often, and if any of my friends, or those who are not my friends, are too much for me, I go out and choose a plot of ground in which to bury him or her. Then I bury them, as it were. There they lie, dead and powerless, till they come back new and better characters, their lives and their deeds looked at after my own fashion, I write down in my diary, as everyone ought to do. Then, if any of our friends act absurdly, no one need to be vexed about it. Let them bury the offenders out of sight and keep their good temper. They can also read the Intelligencer, which is a paper written by the people. with their hands guided. When the time comes for the history of my life to be bound by the grave, then they will write upon it as my epitaph, "The man with a cheerful temper." And this is my story. Heartache. The little history I am about to tell is, as so many are, divided into two unequal halves. The first might easily be omitted by the impatient listener, and yet without it, the second would seem almost too abrupt, too bare of meaning. So let us begin at the beginning, where all things truly begin, quietly, unassumingly, without the faintest hint of the sorrow that lies waiting beyond the turn of the page. We were residing at a country manor, a stately old house with whitewashed walls and tall windows that caught the afternoon sun. Its owner, a gentleman of distinction, had been called away for a few days on business. The air was heavy with the smell of summer fields and tanned leather, for the nearby town was known for its tanneries. And so it happened that one morning a lady arrived from that very town, a plump, courteous widow with a nervous little pug dog tucked beneath her arm. She came, she explained, to settle a matter of property, shares in her late husband's tannery, and had brought with her the certificates, neatly folded and tied with blue ribbon. She was a woman of order, of tidy habits and small anxieties. We, wishing to assist, advised her to seal the papers in an envelope, write upon it the title and address of the proprietor of the estate, General War Commissary, Knight, and so forth, and leave it in our keeping until the master's return. The lady agreed at once, but as she took up the pen and dipped it in ink, her hand trembled slightly. "Be so kind," she said softly, "as to repeat the address once more, slowly." We complied. She wrote, her brow wrinkling with care, until midway through General War, she stopped, sighed deeply, and said with a little half laugh, half sigh, "Ah, but I'm only a woman." While she wrote, her pug, Puggy, had been placed on the floor. He did not like it. He was a round-bodied creature, with a blunt nose and folds of velvet skin along his back, and he expressed his displeasure by growling in a manner that was more comical than fierce. "He doesn't bite," said the widow. "Poor soul, he hasn't a tooth in his head. He's like one of the family, faithful but bad-tempered, though that's no fault of his own. My grandchildren tease him, you see. They play wedding, and he must be bridesmaid, dressed up in lace and ribbons. It's all too much for the old gentleman." She sealed her envelope, took up Puggy again, with a tenderness one reserves for a frail child, and departed in her little carriage. That was the end of the first part of the story. The part, as I said, which might well have been left untold. A week later, the second part began. We arrived in the same town and lodged at a small inn whose windows overlooked the tannery yard. The place was divided by a high wooden fence. On one side were raw hides, brown and stiff, stretched across racks to dry in the sun, and on the other were neat piles of finished leather, soft and yellow as parchment. The air was thick with the sharp, sour odor of tanning, a smell that spoke of labor and livelihood. That morning, poor Puggy had died. The widow's grandchildren, for he had never married, were preparing his funeral in the far corner of the yard. They were earnest about it, as children are about all ceremonies of their own invention. They dug a little grave and bordered it carefully with broken flower pots. They filled it with clean sand, and at its head planted an empty beer bottle neck upwards, not symbolic, perhaps, but proudly ornamental in their eyes. When all was ready, they danced around the grave. Then the eldest boy, a practical fellow of 7, with a shock of yellow hair, proposed an idea. "Let's have an exhibition," he said. "Let's show Puggy's grave to everyone on the street. Admission, 1 trouser button." It was a fine plan, and the others clapped in agreement. Buttons, after all, were universal currency. Each boy had at least one to spare, and if not, could borrow from his suspenders. Before long, the narrow street was filled with visitors. Boys and girls came running, each paying his button at the gate. Some went home afterward, with only one suspender to hold their trousers. But they did not mind. They had seen Puggy's grave, and that was a sight worth any price. Outside the gate, however, stood one child who did not enter. She was a little girl, poorly dressed, but strikingly lovely, with tangled golden curls and eyes of the clearest blue, eyes that seemed to hold all the brightness of a morning sky after rain. She said nothing, merely watched as the others went in and out, her lips pressed together, her small hands clasped before her. She had no button. She knew it, and said not a word. When the last visitor had left, and the laughter had faded into the alley, she crept to the gate, peered in once more, and then sat down on the ground. There, with her thin brown fingers covering her face, she began to sob. Softly, at first, then with the deep, helpless grief only a child can feel. She had not seen Puggy's grave. To her, it was a loss proud and terrible, a sorrow as real as any that weighs upon grown hearts. We watched from above, from the window of our room at the inn, and, as so often happens when we look down upon the small tragedies of life, we smiled, for from such a distance, be it from a window or from years gone by, sorrow itself takes on a strange gentleness, almost a beauty. That, dear reader, is the whole of the tale. Whoever fails to understand it may go and buy a share in the widow's tannery, for the price of comprehension, like the price of admission, is small, yet few are willing to pay it. Everything in its proper place. It was over 100 years ago. By the great lake behind the wood, there stood an old mansion. Round about it circled a deep ditch with bulrushes, reeds, and grasses growing in it. Close by the bridge, near the entrance gate, an old willow tree bent over the reeds. From the narrow lane came the sound of horns and the trampling of horses, and therefore the little girl who tended the geese hastened to drive her charges away from the bridge before the hunting party came galloping up. They approached with such speed that she was obliged to climb up onto one of the high cornerstones of the bridge to avoid being run down. She was still little more than a child, pretty and slender, with a gentle expression in her face and lovely, bright eyes. But the Baron took no note of this. As he galloped past her, he reversed the whip in his hand, and in rough play gave her such a blow in the chest with the butt end that she fell backward into the ditch. "Everything in its proper place," he cried. "Into the mud with you." And he laughed loudly, for this was intended to be funny, and the rest of the company joined in his mirth. They shouted and clamored, while the hunting dogs barked even more loudly than before. It was indeed rich birds come rushing. But goodness knows how rich he was. The poor goose girl, in falling, managed to seize one of the drooping branches of the willow tree and hang from it over the muddy water. As soon as the company and the dogs had disappeared through the castle gate, she tried to climb up again, but the branch broke off at the top, and she would have fallen into the reeds if, at that moment, a strong hand had not caught her from above. It was a peddler who, from a little distance away, had seen what had happened and had hurried up to give aid. "Everything in its proper place," he said, mocking the Baron, and pulled her up to the dry ground. He put the tree branch back to the place from which it had broken. But everything in its place cannot always be managed, and so he thrust it into the soft ground. "Grow, if you can, until you can furnish a good flute for them up yonder," he said. It would have given him great pleasure to see the Baron and his companions well thrashed. And then the peddler made his way to the mansion, but did not go into the main hall. He was much too humble for that. He went instead to the servants' quarters, and the men and maids looked over his stock of goods and bargained with him. From above, where the guests were at table, was heard a sound of roaring and screaming that was intended for song. that was the best they could do. There was loud laughter, mingled with the barking and yapping of dogs, for there was riotous feasting up there. Wine and strong old ale foamed in jugs and glasses, and the dogs ate with their masters, and some of them, after having their snouts wiped with their ears, were kissed by them. The peddler was told to come upstairs with his wares, but it was only to make fun of him. The wine had mounted into their heads, and the sense had flown out. They insisted that the peddler drink with them, but so that he would have to drink quickly, they poured his beer into a stocking. This was considered a great joke and caused more gales of laughter. And then entire farms, complete with oxen and peasants, were staked on a single card and lost and won. Everything in its proper place, said the peddler, thankfully, when he had finally escaped from what he called the Sodom and Gomorrah up there. The open road is my proper place, he said. I didn't feel at all happy up there. And the little goose girl nodded kindly to him as he walked by the pasture gate. Days passed, and weeks passed, and the willow branch that the peddler had thrust into the ground beside the water ditch remained fresh and green, and even put forth new shoots. The little goose girl saw that it must have taken root, and she was very happy about it. This was her tree, she thought. Yes, the tree flourished, but everything else at the mansion went to seed, what with feasting and gambling. For these two are like wheels, upon which no man can stand securely. Scarcely 6 years had passed before the Baron left the mansion, a beggar, with bag and stick in hand, and the mansion itself was bought by a rich merchant, and the purchaser was the very peddler who had once been mocked at in the great hall and forced to drink beer from a stocking. Honesty and industry are good winds to speed a vessel, and now the peddler was the master of the mansion. But from that moment, card-playing was not permitted there anymore. That is bad reading, he said, when the devil saw a Bible for the first time. He wanted something to counteract it, and so he invented card-playing. The new owner took himself a wife, and who do you suppose she was but the pretty little goose girl who had always been so faithful and good? In her new clothes, she looked as beautiful and fine as if she had been of high birth. How did all this happen? Well, that is too long a story to tell you in these busy times. But it really did happen. And the most important part of the story is still to come. It was pleasant and cheerful to live in the old mansion. The mother managed the household affairs, and the father superintended the estate, and blessings seemed to rain down on the home. For where there is rectitude, prosperity is sure to follow. The old house was cleaned and repainted, ditches were cleared, and new fruit trees were planted. The floors were as polished as a draft board, and everything wore a bright, cheerful look. In the large hall, the lady sat in the winter evenings, with all her maids spinning woolen and linen yarn. And every Sunday evening, there was a reading from the Bible by the Counselor of Justice himself. In his old age, the peddler had achieved this title. There were children, and as they grew up, they received the best possible education, although all were not equally gifted, just as it is in all families. But the willow branch outside had grown to be a big, splendid tree, which stood free and undisturbed. "That is our family tree," the old people said. And they explained to all the children, even those who were not very bright, that the tree was to be honored and respected. So 100 years rolled by. Now it was our own time. The lake had grown into a marsh, and the old mansion had almost disappeared. A long, narrow pool of water near the remains of a stone wall was all that was left of the deep ditch. Yet here still stood a magnificent old willow tree with drooping branches. It was the family tree, and it showed how beautiful a tree may be if left to itself. To be sure, the main trunk was split from root to crown, and storms had given it a little twist, but it still stood firmly. From every cleft and crack into which the winds had carried soil, grasses and flowers had sprung forth, especially near the top, where the great branches separated. There, a small hanging garden had been formed of wild raspberries and chickweed, and even a little service berry tree had taken root and stood slender and graceful in the midst of the old tree, which reflected itself in the dark water when the wind had driven all the duckweed into a corner of the pool. A narrow path which led across the fields passed close by the old tree. High on the hill near the forest, with a splendid view in every direction, stood the new mansion, large and magnificent, the glass of its windows so clear and transparent that there seemed to be no panes there at all. The stately flight of steps that led up to the entrance looked like a bower covered with roses and broad-leaved plants. The lawn was as freshly and vividly green as if each separate blade of grass were washed mornings and evenings. In the great hall hung valuable pictures. There were silken chairs and sofas so airy and graceful that they seemed almost ready to walk on their own legs. There were tables with polished marble tops, and books bound in rich morocco and gold. Yes, they were really wealthy people who lived here. They were people of position. Here lived the Baron and his family. Everything here fitted with everything else. The motto of the house was still, "Everything in its proper place." So all the pictures that at one time had hung with honor and glory in the former mansion were now relegated to the passage that led to the servants' hall, for they were considered nothing but old junk. Especially 2 old portraits, one of a man in a pink coat and a wig, the other of a lady with powdered, high-dressed hair and a rose held in her hand, and each surrounded by a large wreath of willow branches. These 2 old pictures were marred by many holes, for the Baron's children were fond of using the 2 old people as targets for their crossbows. They were the portraits of the Counselor of Justice and his lady, from whom the whole family descended. But they didn't really belong to our family, said one of the young barons. He was a peddler and she was a goose girl. They weren't like Papa and Mama. The pictures were judged to be worthless junk, and as the motto was, everything in its proper place, great-grandmother and great-grandfather were hung in the passage that led to the servants' hall. Now, the son of the village pastor was the tutor at the mansion. One day, he was out walking with his pupils, the young barons and their older sister, who had just been confirmed. They followed the path toward the old willow, and as they strolled along, the young girl gathered some field flowers and bound them together, everything in its proper place, and the flowers became a beautiful bouquet. At the same time, she heard every word that was spoken, for she liked to listen to the clergyman's son talk of the power of nature and the great men and women of history. She had a good, sweet temper, with true nobility of soul and mind, and a heart that appreciated all that God had created. They stopped at the old willow tree, where the youngster boy insisted on having a flute made for him, as had been cut for him from other willow branches before. And the pastor's son, therefore, broke off a branch. "Oh, don't!" cried the young baroness. But it was already too late. "That is our famous old tree," she explained, "and I love it dearly. They laugh at me at home for it, but I don't care. There's an old tale attached to this tree." Then she told them all the story about the tree, about the old mansion, and the peddler, and the goose girl who had met for the first time on this very spot, and had afterward founded the noble family to which these young people belonged. They didn't want to be knighted, the grand old people, she said. They kept their motto, everything in its proper place, and so they thought it would be out of place for them to buy a title. It was their son, my grandfather, who was made a baron. They say he was very learned, a great favorite with princes and princesses, and was present at all their festivals. The others at home love him the best, but I don't know. There seems to be something about that first pair that draws my heart to them. How comfortable and patriarchal it must have been in the old mansion then, with the mistress sitting at her spinning wheel among all her maids, and the old master reading aloud from the Bible. They must have been wonderful people, sensible people, said the pastor's son. Then the conversation turned naturally toward noblemen and commoners. The young man hardly seemed to belong to the lower classes. So well did he understand and speak of the purpose and meaning of nobility. It is good fortune, he said, to belong to a family that has distinguished itself. In your own blood, there is then, so to speak, a spur that urges you on to make progress in everything that is good. It's gratifying to bear the name of a family that is a card of admission to the highest circles. Nobility means something great and noble. It is a gold coin that has been stamped to show its worth. It is a modern belief, and many poets, of course, agree with it, that all of nobility must be bad and stupid, and that the lower you go among poor people, the more wisdom and virtue do you find. But that isn't my opinion, for I think it's entirely foolish, entirely false. There are many beautiful and kindly traits found in the upper classes. I could give you many examples. Here's one my mother told me once. She was visiting a noble family in town, where I think my grandmother had nursed the lady of the house. The old nobleman and my mother were together in his apartments when he noticed an old woman come limping into the courtyard on crutches. She used to come there every Sunday to receive a little gift. "Ah, there is the poor old lady," said the nobleman. "Walking is so hard for her." And before my mother understood what he meant, the 70-year-old excellency was out of the room and down the stairs, carrying his gift to the old woman, to spare her the difficult walk. Now that was only a little thing, but like the widow's mite, it has a sound that echoes to the depths of the human heart. Those are the things that poets ought to sing about, especially in these times, for it does good. It soothes and reconciles mankind. But when a person, just because he is of noble birth and has a pedigree, stands on his hind legs and neighs in the street like an Arabian horse, and when a commoner has been in the rooms, sneers, "Something out of the street has been in here," that is nobility in decay, and just a mask such as Thespis created. People are glad to see one like that satirized. That was the way the pastor's son spoke. It was a rather long speech, but while talking, he had finished carving the flute. That night, there was a great party at the mansion, with many guests from about the neighborhood and from the capital. The main hall was full of people. Some of the ladies were dressed tastefully, while others showed no taste at all. The clergymen of the neighborhood remained gathered respectfully in a corner, looking as if they were conducting a burial service there. But it was a party of pleasure. Only the pleasure hadn't begun yet. There was to be a great concert, so the little baron brought in his new willow flute. But neither he nor his father could get a note from it, so they decided it was worthless. There were chamber music and song, both of the sort that pleases the performers most, yet quite charming. Suddenly, a certain cavalier, his father's son and nothing else, spoke to the tutor. "Are you a musician?" he demanded. "You play the flute and make it, too. That's genius. That should command and receive the place of honor. Heaven knows, I try to follow the times. You have to do that, you know? Come, you will enchant us all with the little instrument, won't you?" Then he handed the tutor the flute made from the old willow down by the pool, and announced loudly that the tutor was about to favor them with a solo on that instrument. Now, it was easy to tell that they only wanted to make fun of him, so the tutor refused, though he could really play well. But they crowded around him and insisted so strongly that at last he put the flute to his lips. That was a strange flute. A tone was heard, as sustained as the whistle of a steam engine. Yes, and much stronger. It echoed over the courtyard, garden, and wood, and miles away into the country. And with that note, there came a rushing wind that seemed to roar, "Everything in its proper place." And then Papa flew, as if carried by the wind, straight out of the great hall and into the shepherd's cottage, while the shepherd was blown. Not into the main hall, for there he could not come. No, up into the servants' room, among the haughty lackeys strutting in their silk stockings. The proud servants were almost paralyzed at the very thought that such a common person would dare to sit at table with them. But in the great hall, the young baroness flew to the upper end of the table, where she was worthy to sit. The pastor's son found himself next to her, and there they both sat, as if they were a newly married couple. A gentle old count of one of the most ancient families in the country remained unmoved in his honorable place, for the flute was just, as everyone ought to be. But the witty cavalier, who was nothing more than the son of his father, and who had caused the flute playing, flew head over heels into the poultry house. And he was not alone. For a whole mile around the countryside, the sound of the flute could be heard, and remarkable things happened. The family of a rich merchant, driving along in their coach and four, was blown completely out of the carriage and could not even find a place on the back of it. Two wealthy peasants who in our times had grown too high for their own cornfields were tumbled back into the ditch. Yes, that was indeed a dangerous flute, but luckily it burst after that first note, and that was a fortunate thing for everybody, for then it was put back into the owner's pocket. Everything in its proper place. The next day, no one spoke of what had happened, and that is where we get the expression, to pocket the flute. Everything was back in its former state, except for the two old portraits of the merchant and the goose girl. They had been blown up onto the wall of the drawing room. And when one of the well-known experts said they had been painted by an old master, they were left there and carefully restored. Nobody knew before that they were worth anything. And how could they have known? Now they hung in the place of honor, everything in its proper place. And it will come to that. Eternity is long, even longer than this story. The Goblin and the Huckster. There was once a regular student who lived in a garret and had no possessions. And there was also a regular huckster to whom the house belonged and who occupied the ground floor. A goblin lived with the huckster because at Christmas he always had a large dish full of jam with a great piece of butter in the middle. The huckster could afford this, and therefore the goblin remained with the huckster, which was very cunning of him. One evening, the student came into the shop through the back door to buy candles and cheese for himself. He had no one to send, and therefore he came himself. He obtained what he wished, and then the huckster and his wife nodded good evening to him. And she was a woman who could do more than merely nod, for she had usually plenty to say for herself. The student nodded in return as he turned to leave, then suddenly stopped and began reading the piece of paper in which the cheese was wrapped. It was a leaf torn out of an old book, a book that ought not to have been torn up, for it was full of poetry. "Yonder lies some more of the same sort," said the huckster. "I gave an old woman a few coffee berries for it. You shall have the rest for 6 pence, if you will." "Indeed I will," said the student. "Give me the book instead of the cheese. I can eat my bread and butter without cheese. It would be a sin to tear up a book like this. You are a clever man and a practical man, but you understand no more about poetry than that cask yonder." This was a very rude speech, especially against the cask, but the huckster and the student both laughed, for it was only said in fun. But the goblin felt very angry that any man should venture to say such things to a huckster who was a householder and sold the best butter as soon as it was night. And the shop closed, and everyone in bed except the student. The goblin stepped softly into the bedroom where the huckster's wife slept and took away her tongue, which, of course, she did not then want. Whatever object in the room he placed his tongue upon immediately received voice and speech, and was able to express its thoughts and feelings as readily as the lady herself could do. It could only be used by one object at a time, which was a good thing, as a number speaking at once would have caused great confusion. The goblin laid the tongue upon the cask, in which lay a quantity of old newspapers. "Is it really true," he asked, "that you do not know what poetry is?" "Of course I know," replied the cask. "Poetry is something that always stands in the corner of a newspaper, and is sometimes cut out. And I may venture to affirm that I have more of it in me than the student has, and I am only a poor tub of the hucksters." Then the goblin placed the tongue on the coffee mill, and how it did go, to be sure. Then he put it on the butter tub and the cash box, and they all expressed the same opinion as the waste paper tub, and a majority must always be respected. "Now I shall go and tell the student," said the goblin. And with these words, he went quietly up the back stairs to the garret where the student lived. He had a candle burning still, and the goblin peeped through the keyhole and saw that he was reading in the torn book which he had brought out of the shop. But how light the room was! From the book shot forth a ray of light which grew broad and full like the stem of a tree, from which bright rays spread upward and over the student's head. Each leaf was fresh, and each flower was like a beautiful female head, some with dark and sparkling eyes, and others with eyes that were wonderfully blue and clear. The fruit gleamed like stars, and the room was filled with sounds of beautiful music. The little goblin had never imagined, much less seen or heard of, any sight so glorious as this. He stood still on tiptoe, peeping in, till the light went out in the garret. The student, no doubt, had blown out his candle and gone to bed, but the little goblin remained standing there nevertheless, and listening to the music which still sounded on, soft and beautiful, a sweet cradle song for the student, who had lain down to rest. "This is a wonderful place," said the goblin. "I never expected such a thing. I should like to stay here with the student." And the little man thought it over, for he was a sensible little spirit. At last he sighed. "But the student has no jam." So he went downstairs again into the huckster's shop, and it was a good thing he got back when he did, for the cask had almost worn out the lady's tongue. He had given a description of all that he contained on one side, and was just about to turn himself over to the other side to describe what was there, when the goblin entered and restored the tongue to the lady. But from that time forward, the whole shop, from the cash box down to the pine wood logs, formed their opinions from that of the cask, and they all had such confidence in him and treated him with so much respect that when the huckster read the criticisms on theatricals and art of an evening, they fancied it must all come from the cask. But after what he had seen, the goblin could no longer sit and listen quietly to the wisdom and understanding downstairs. So, as soon as the evening light glimmered in the garret, he took courage, for it seemed to him as if the rays of light were strong cables, drawing him up and obliging him to go and peep through the keyhole. And while there, a feeling of vastness came over him, such as we experience by the ever-moving sea when the storm breaks forth, and it brought tears into his eyes. He did not himself know why he wept, yet a kind of pleasant feeling mingled with his tears. How wonderfully glorious it would be to sit with the student under such a tree. But that was out of the question. He must be content to look through the keyhole and be thankful for even that. There he stood on the old landing, with the autumn wind blowing down upon him through the trapdoor. It was very cold, but the little creature did not really feel it, till the light in the garret went out, and the tones of music died away. Then how he shivered, and crept downstairs again to his warm corner, where it felt home-like and comfortable. And when Christmas came again, and brought the dish of jam and the great lump of butter, he liked the huckster best of all. Soon after, in the middle of the night, the goblin was awoke by a terrible noise and knocking against the window shutters and the house doors, and by the sound of the watchman's horn. For a great fire had broken out, and the whole street appeared full of flames. Was it in their house or a neighbor's? No one could tell, for terror had seized upon all. The huckster's wife was so bewildered that she took her gold earrings out of her ears and put them in her pocket, that she might save something at least. The huckster ran to get his business papers, and the servant resolved to save her blue silk mantle, which she had managed to buy. Each wished to keep the best things they had. The goblin had the same wish, for with one spring he was upstairs and in the student's room, whom he found standing by the open window and looking quite calmly at the fire, which was raging at the house of a neighbor opposite. The goblin caught up the wonderful book which lay on the table and popped it into his red cap, which he held tightly with both hands. The greatest treasure in the house was saved, and he ran away with it to the roof and seated himself on the chimney. The flames of the burning house opposite illuminated him as he sat, both hands pressed tightly over his cap, in which the treasure lay. And then he found out what feelings really reigned in his heart, and knew exactly which way they tended. And yet, when the fire was extinguished, and the goblin again began to reflect, he hesitated, and said at last, "I must divide myself between the two. I cannot quite give up the huckster because of the jam." And this is a representation of human nature. We are like the goblin. We all go to visit the huckster because of the jam. Under the willow tree. The country around the town of Kyoga is very bare. The town itself lies by the seashore, which is always beautiful, although it might be more beautiful than it is, because all around are flat fields and a forest a long way off. But one always finds something beautiful in the spot that is one's own home, something for which one longs, even when one is in the most wonderful spot in the world. And we must admit that the outer edge of Kyoga, where small, humble gardens line the little stream that flows into the sea, could be very pretty in the summertime. This was the opinion of the two small children, Knud and Johanna, who were playing there, crawling under the gooseberry bushes to reach each other. In one of the gardens, there stood an elder tree, in the other an old willow, and under the latter, the children were especially fond of playing, although the tree stood close beside the stream, and they might easily have fallen into the water. They were allowed to play there, for the eye of God watches over little ones. Otherwise, they would be very badly off indeed. Besides, these two were careful about the water. In fact, the boy was so afraid of it that in the summer he could not be lured into the sea, where the other children were fond of splashing about. As a result, he had to bear the teasing of the others as best he could. But once Johanna, the little girl, dreamed she was out in a boat, and Knud waded out to join her, with the water rising until it closed over his head. And from the moment little Knud heard of this dream, he could no longer bear to be called a coward. He might really go into the water now, he said, since Johanna had dreamed it. He never carried that idea into practice, but for all that, the dream remained his great pride. Their poor parents often came together, while Knud and Johanna played in the gardens or on the high road, where a long row of willows had been planted along the ditch. These trees, with their polled tops, certainly did not look very beautiful, but they were there for use rather than for ornament. The old willow tree in the garden was much lovelier, which was why the children took most delight in sitting under it. In Kyoga itself was a great marketplace, and at fair time this plaza was gay, with whole streets of tents, filled with silk ribbons, boots, and everything a person might desire. There were great crowds then, and generally the weather was rainy. One could easily smell the odor of peasants' clothes, but this could not destroy the fragrance that streamed from a booth full of honey cakes. And best of all, the man who kept this particular booth came every year during fair time to lodge in the house of little Knud's parents. Consequently, every now and then, there was a present of a bit of honey cake. And of course, Johanna always received her share. But the best thing of all was that this gingerbread dealer knew all sorts of charming stories and could even tell tales about his own gingerbread cakes. One evening, he told a story about them, which made such a deep impression on the two children that they never forgot it. For that reason, perhaps we should hear it too, especially since it is not very long. On the shop counter, he said, there once lay 2 gingerbread cakes. One was in the shape of a man with a hat on, the other of a maiden with no bonnet, but with a blot of yellow on top of her head. Both their faces were on the upper side, for that was the side that was supposed to be looked at, and not the other. Indeed, most people have one side from which they should be viewed. On his left side, the man wore a bitter almond for a heart, but the maiden, on the other hand, was honey cake all through. They were placed on the counter as samples, so they remained there for a long time, until at last they fell in love with each other. But neither told the other, which they should have done if they had expected anything to come of it. He is a man, so he must speak first, thought the maiden. But she was quite contented, for she knew in her heart that her love was returned. His thoughts were far more extravagant, which is just like a man. He dreamed that he was a street urchin, and that he had 4 pennies all his own, and that he bought the maiden and ate her up. So they lay on the counter for days and weeks and grew dry. But the thoughts of the maiden remained still gentle and womanly. It's enough for me that I have lived on the same table with him, thought the maiden. And then she broke in two. If only she had known of my love, she would have held together a little longer, thought he. So that's the story. And here they are, both of them, said the baker. They're remarkable for their strange history and for their silent love, which never came to anything. And now they're both for you. With that, he gave Johanna the man, who was still in one piece, and Knud got the broken maiden. But the children had been untouched by the story, that they couldn't be so bold as to eat up the lovers. Next day, they took them out to the Kyoga churchyard, where, winter and summer, lovely ivy covers the church wall like a rich carpet. They stood the 2 cake figures up among the green leaves in the bright sunshine, and told a group of other children the story of the silent love that was useless. That is to say, the love was, for the story was charming, they all found. But when they looked again at the gingerbread couple, they found that a mischievous big boy had eaten up the broken maiden. The children cried about that, and later, probably so that the poor lover might not be left alone in the world, they ate him up too. But they never forgot the story. The 2 children were always together by the elder tree or under the willow, and little Johanna sang the most beautiful songs in a voice as clear as a silver bell. Knud had not a note of music in him, but at least he knew the words of the songs, and that was something. But the people of Kyoga, even the wife of the hardware merchant, stopped and listened when Johanna sang. "She has a very sweet voice, that little girl," she said. Those were glorious days. But glorious days do not last forever. And finally, the neighbors separated. Johanna's mother died, and her father planned to marry again in Copenhagen, where he had been promised a position as messenger, a job supposed to be very profitable. While the neighbors parted with regrets, the children wept bitterly. But the parents promised to write to each other at least once a year. And Knud was made apprentice to a shoemaker. For such a big boy was too old to run around wild any longer. And furthermore, he was confirmed. Oh, how he would have liked to see little Johanna in Copenhagen on that day of celebration. But he didn't go, and he had never been there, although Kjøge is only 5 Danish miles away. On a clear day, Knud could see the distant towers of the city across the bay, and on the day of his confirmation, he could even see the golden cross on the tower of the Church of Our Lady glitter in the sun. Ah, how often his thoughts turned toward Johanna. And did she remember him? Yes. At Christmas time, a letter came from her father to Knud's parents, saying that they were doing very well in Copenhagen, and Johanna could look forward to a brilliant career on the strength of her lovely voice. She already had a position in the opera house and was already earning a little money, out of which she sent her dear neighbors of Kjøge $1 for a Merry Christmas Eve. Johanna herself added a postscript asking them to drink to her health. And in the same postscript was also written, "Friendly greetings to Knud." They all wept. But this was all very pleasant, for they were tears of joy that they shed. Knud's thoughts had been with Johanna every day, and now he knew that she also thought of him. The nearer came the end of his apprenticeship, the more clearly did he realize that he was in love with Johanna, and that she must be his little wife. When he thought of this, a smile brightened his face, and he drew the thread faster than before, and pressed his foot against the knee strap. He didn't even pay any attention when he ran the awl deep into one of his fingers. He was determined that he would not play the silent lover, like the 2 gingerbread cakes. The story had taught him a lesson. Now he was a journeyman, and his knapsack was packed ready for his trip. At last, for the first time in his life, he was to go to Copenhagen, where a master was already expecting him. How surprised and happy Johanna would be to see him. She was just 17 now, and he 19. He wanted to buy a gold ring for her before he left Kjøge, but then decided he could get a much nicer one in Copenhagen. And so he took leave of his parents, and on a rainy, windy day in autumn, set forth on foot from the town of his birth. The damp leaves were dropping from the trees, and he was wet to the skin when he arrived at his new master's home in the big city of Copenhagen. The following Sunday, he would pay a visit to Johanna's father. So, on Sunday, he put on the new journeyman's clothes and the new hat from Kyoga that became him very well. For till then, he had only worn a cap. He easily found the house he was seeking and mounted flight after flight of stairs until he became almost dizzy. It seemed terrible to him for people to live piled up on top of each other in this intricate city. Everything in the parlor looked prosperous, and Johanna's father received him in kindly friendship. Knud was a stranger to the new wife, but she too shook hands with him and gave him a cup of coffee. "Johanna will be glad to see you," said the father. "You've grown into a nice-looking young man. Yes, wait till you see her. There is a girl who rejoices my heart, and please God, she will rejoice it still more. She has her own room now, and pays us rent regularly for it." Then he knocked quite politely at his daughter's door, as if he were a stranger, and they went in. Oh, how pretty it was! He was certain there wasn't such a lovely room in La Kyoga. The queen herself could not be more charmingly lodged. There were carpets and window curtains that hung quite to the floor, and flowers and pictures, and a velvet chair, and even a mirror as large as a door, and so clear there was a danger of walking into it. A glance showed all this to Knud, and yet he could look at nothing but Johanna. She was a full-grown maiden now, quite different from Knud's memories of her, and much more beautiful. There wasn't a girl in Kyoga like her. How graceful she was, and with what a strange, unsure gaze she looked at Knud. But that was only for a moment, and then she rushed toward him as if it kiss him. She did not actually do so, but she very nearly did. Yes, she was really happy to see her childhood friend again. There were tears in Johanna's eyes. She had so much to say, and so many questions to ask about everything, from Knud's parents to the elder tree and the willow, which she called Elder Mother and Willow Father, just as if they had been human beings. And indeed, they might be called so, just as much as the gingerbread cakes. She spoke of them too, and their silent love, and how they had lain on the shop counter and broken in two. And at this she laughed heartily, while the blood rushed to Knud's cheeks, and his heart beat faster and faster. No, she had not grown haughty at all. And Knud noticed quite well that it was because of her that her parents invited him to spend the evening. With her one hand, she poured out the tea and gave him a cup, and afterward she read aloud to them from a book. And it seemed to Knud that what she read was all about himself and his love, for it matched with his thoughts. Then she sang a simple little song, but her singing made it a real story that seemed to be the outpouring of her very heart. Yes, Knud knew she cared for him. He could not keep tears of joy from rolling down his cheeks, nor could he speak a single word. He seemed struck dumb. But she pressed his hand and murmured, "You have a good heart, Knud. Stay always the way you are now." That was a magnificent evening. It was impossible to sleep afterward, and accordingly, Knud did not sleep. When he had left, Johanna's father had said, "Now, don't forget us altogether. Don't let the whole winter go by before you come to us again." Knud felt that gave him permission to repeat the call the following Sunday, and determined to do so. But every evening after work, and the working hours lasted until candlelight there, Knud went out into the town. He returned to the street in which Johanna lived, and looked up at her window. It was almost always lighted, and one evening he could even see the shadow of her face quite plainly on the curtain. That was an evening he would never forget. His master's wife did not like his gallivanting abroad every evening, as she put it, and shook her head ruefully over him. But the master only smiled. "He's just a young fellow," he said. "On Sunday we shall see each other," Knud thought, "and I shall tell her how she is always in my thoughts, and that she must be my little wife. I know I'm only a poor journeyman shoemaker, but I can become a master, and I'll work and save. Yes, I'll tell her that. No good comes from a silent love. I've learned that much from the gingerbread." Sunday came at last, and Knud set out. But to his great disappointment, they had to tell him they were all invited out that evening. But as he left, Johanna pressed his hand and said, "Have you ever been to the theater? You must go there sometime. I shall be singing on Wednesday, and if you have time that evening, I'll send you a ticket. My father knows where you are living." How kind it was of her. And at noon on Wednesday, he received a sealed envelope. There were no words inside, but the ticket was there. And that evening, Knud went to the theater for the first time in his life. And what did he see? He saw Johanna looking more charming and beautiful than he ever could have believed possible. To be sure, she was married to a stranger, but that was just in the play. It was only make-believe, as Knud understood very well. If it had been true, he thought, she would never have had the heart to send him a ticket so that he could go and see it. And everybody shouted and applauded, and Knud cried out, "Hurrah!" Even the king was there, smiling at Johanna, and he seemed to delight in her loveliness. How small Knud felt then. Still, he loved her dearly, and felt that she loved him too. But he knew it was up to the man to speak the first word, as the gingerbread maiden in the story had taught him. Indeed, there was a great deal of truth in that story. So, as soon as Sunday came, he went to see her again, feeling as solemn as if he were going into a church. Johanna was at home alone. It could not have happened more fortunately. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I almost sent Father after you, but I felt in my heart that you would be here this evening. I have to tell you that I am leaving for France on Friday. I must study there if I am to become a great artiste." At those words, it seemed to Knud as if the whole room were whirling round and round with him. He felt as if his heart would break. There were no tears in his eyes, but Johanna could not fail to see how stricken he was. "You honest, faithful soul," she said, and her tenderness loosened his tongue. He told her how much he loved her and begged her to become his little wife. Then he saw Johanna turn pale as she dropped his hand and said seriously and sadly, "Dear Knud, don't make us both unhappy. I shall always be a loving sister to you, one in whom you may trust, but I shall never be anything more." Gently, she placed her soft hand on his hot forehead. "God gives us the strength for much," she said, "if only we try to do our best." At that moment, her stepmother entered the room, and Johanna said, "Knud is quite heartbroken because I'm going away. Come, be a man." And she laid her hand on his shoulder. It seemed as if they had been talking only of her journey. "You're a child," she laughed, "but now you must be good and reasonable, as you used to be under the willow tree when we were both children." Knud felt as if the whole world were out of joint, and his thoughts were like a loose thread fluttering in the wind. He remained for tea, though he hardly knew if they had asked him to, and they were kind and gentle, and Johann poured out his tea and sang to him. Her voice did not have its old tone, but still it was wonderfully beautiful and nearly broke his heart. And then they parted. Knud could not bear to offer his hand, but she took it and said, "Surely you'll shake hands with your sister at parting, old playmate." She smiled through the tears that were in her own eyes and repeated the word, "brother." Yes, that was supposed to be a great consolation. Such was their parting. She sailed for France, and Knud wandered about the muddy streets of Copenhagen. His comrades in the workshop asked why he was so gloomy and urged him to join them and amuse himself, for he was still a young fellow. So they took him to a dance hall. He saw many pretty girls there, but there was not one to compare with Johanna. Here, where he had hoped to forget her, she was more vivid than ever before the eyes of his soul. God gives us the strength for much, she had said, if only we try to do our best. Then a devotion came to his mind, and he folded his hands quietly. The violins played, and the girls danced gaily. And suddenly, it seemed to him that he should never have brought Johanna into a place like this, for she was there with him in his heart. Knud ran out and wandered aimlessly through the streets. He passed by the house where she had lived. It was dark there. Everywhere were darkness and emptiness and loneliness. The world went in its way, and Knud went his. Winter set in, and the waters froze over. It was as if everything were preparing itself for burial. But when spring returned, and the first steamer was to start, an intense longing seized him to go away, far into the world, anywhere, but not too close to France. So he packed his knapsack and wandered deep into Germany, from town to town, finding rest and peace nowhere. It was not until he came to the glorious old city of Nuremberg that he could quiet his restless spirit, and there he decided to stay. Nuremberg is a strange old city, looking as if it had been cut out of an old-fashioned picture book. The streets seem to wander along just as they please. The houses did not like to stand in regular rows. Gables with little towers, arabesques, and pillars lean out over the walks, and from the queer peaked roofs, waterspouts shaped like dragons or long, slim dogs push out far over the streets. There, in the Nuremberg marketplace, stood Knud, his knapsack on his back. He was beside one of the old fountains, where splendid bronze figures, scriptural and historical, rose up between the gushing jets of water. A pretty little servant girl was just filling her pails, and she gave Knud a refreshing drink. And as her hand was full of roses, she gave him one of them, too. And he accepted that as a good sign. From the church nearby came the strains of an organ. They rang as familiar to him as the tones of the organ at home in Kyoga Church. And he entered the great cathedral. The sunlight streamed in through the high stained glass windows and down between the lofty, slender pillars. His spirit found rest, and Knud found a good master in Nuremberg, and he lived in his house, and there learned to speak German. The old moat around the town of Nuremberg has been converted into little kitchen gardens, but the high walls with their heavy towers are standing yet. The rope maker twists his cords on a wooden gallery along the inside of the town wall, where elder bushes grow out of the cracks and clefts, spreading their green branches over the small, lowly houses below. In one of these houses, Knud lived with his master, and over the little garret window where he slept, the elder tree waved its branches. Here he lived for a summer and winter. But when spring returned, he could bear it no longer, for the elder was blooming, and the fragrance of its blossoms carried him back to home and the garden at Kyoga. So Knud left that master and found another farther in town, over whose house no elder bush blossomed. His new workshop was close to one of the old stone bridges by an ever-foaming, low watermill. The stream roared past it, hemmed in by the houses whose decayed old balconies looked about to topple into the water. No elder grew here. There was not even a little green plant in a flower pot. But just opposite stood a grand old willow tree that seemed to cling fast to the house, as if it feared being carried away by the stream. It stretched its branches out over the river, just as the willow at Kyoga spread its arms across the stream by the gardens of home. Yes, Knud had gone from the elder mother to the willow father. This tree had something, especially on moonlit evenings, that went straight to his heart, and that something was not of the moonlight, but of the old willow tree itself. He could not remain there. Why not? Ask the willow tree, ask the blossoming elder. And so he bade farewell to his kind master and to Nuremberg, and traveled on further. To no one did he speak of Johanna, but hid his sorrow in his innermost heart, and he thought of the deep meaning of the old story of the gingerbread. Now he understood why the man had a bitter almond for a heart. He himself had felt the bitterness of it. And Johansa, who was always so gentle and smiling, she was only like the honey cake. The strap of Knud's knapsack seemed so tight across his chest that he could scarcely breathe. But even when he loosened it, he was not relieved. He saw only half the world around him. The other half he carried within him. That's how it was. Not until he was in sight of the high mountains did the world appear freer to him. Now his thoughts were turned outward again, and the tears came into his eyes. The Alps seemed to him like the folded wings of the earth. What if they were to unfold themselves and display their varied pictures of black woods, foaming waters, clouds, and great masses of snow? On the last day, he thought, the world will lift up its mighty wings and mount upward to God, to burst like a soap bubble before the glance of the highest. Ah, he sighed, that last day were here now. Silently, he wandered through a country that seemed to him like an orchard covered with oft turf. From the wooden balconies of the houses, girls, busy with their lace-making, nodded down at him. The summits of the mountains glowed in the red evening sun. And when he saw the blue lakes gleaming through the dark trees, he thought of the seacoast near Kyoga, and there was a sadness in his heart. But it was pain no longer. There, where the Rhine rolls onward like a great wave, and then bursts into snow-white, gleaming, cloud-like masses, as if clouds were being created there, with the rainbow fluttering like a loose band above them. It was there that he thought of the mill at Kyoga, with its rushing, foaming stream. He would have been glad to have remained in the quiet Rhenish town. But here also there were too many elder trees and too many willows. So he traveled on, over the mighty, towering mountains, through shattered walls of rock, and on roads that clung to the mountainsides like the nests of swallows. The waters foamed in the depths, the clouds themselves were below him, and he strode on in the warm summer sun over shiny thistles, alpine roses, and snow. Thus he said farewell to the lands of the north, and journeyed on under the shade of blooming chestnut trees, and through vineyards and fields of maize. Now the mountains were a wall between him and all his memories. That was how he wished it to be. At last he reached that great, glorious city called Milan, and here he found a German master who gave him work. The master and his wife, in whose workshop he labored now, were a pious old couple, and they became quite fond of the quiet journeyman, who said little but worked all the harder and led a devout Christian life. And to Knud also, it seemed that God had lifted the heavy burden from his heart. His favorite relaxation was to climb from time to time to the mighty marble church, which seemed to him to have been built of the snow of his native Northland, formed into images, pointed towers, and decorated open halls. From every corner and every niche, the white statues smiled down upon him. Above him was the blue sky. Below him were the city and the wide-spreading green plains of Lombardy. And toward the north, the high mountains capped with perpetual snow. Then he thought of the church at Kyoga, with its red, ivy-colored walls. But he did not long to go there again. Here, beyond the mountains, he would be buried. He had lived there a year, and 3 years had passed since he had left his home, when one day his master took him into the city, not to the circus with its daring riders. No, to the great opera, where was an auditorium well worth seeing. There were 7 tiers of boxes, and from each beautiful silken curtains hung, while from the ground to the dizzy heights of the roof there sat the most elegant ladies, with corsages in their hands, as if they were at a ball, and gentlemen in full dress, many of them with decorations of gold and silver. It was as bright there as in the noonday sunshine, and the music rolled gloriously and beautifully. Everything was much more splendid than in the theater at Copenhagen. But then Johanna had been in Copenhagen. And here, yes, it was like magic. Johanna was here also. The curtain rose, and she appeared, clad in silk and gold, with a gold crown upon her head. She sang as none but an angel could sing, and came far forward to the front of the stage, and smiled as only Johanna could smile, and looked straight down at Knud. The poor boy seized his master's arm and called out aloud, "Johanna!" The loud music sounded above everything, but no one heard but the master, who nodded his head. "Yes," he said, "her name is Johanna." Then he drew forth his program and showed Knud her name, for the full name was printed there. No, it was not a dream. The great audience applauded and threw wreaths and flowers to Johanna, and every time she went away, they called her back on stage, so that she was always going and coming. In the street outside afterward, the people crowded about her carriage and drew it away in triumph. Knud was in the first row and shouted as joyfully as any. And when the carriage halted before her brightly lighted house, he was standing close beside the door. It opened, and she stepped out. The light fell upon her beloved face, and she smiled, thanked them graciously, and appeared deeply touched. Knud looked straight into her eyes, and she into his. But she never knew him. A gentleman with a decoration glittering on his breast gave her his arm. People said they were betrothed. Then Knud went home and packed his knapsack. He had decided to return to his own home, to the elder and willow trees. Ah, beneath the willow tree. The old couple begged him to remain, but no words could change his mind. It was in vain that they pointed out to him that winter was coming, and the snow had already fallen in the mountains. He replied that he could march, with his knapsack on his back, and supported by his cane, in the wake of a slow-moving carriage, for which a path would have to be cleared. So Knud left for the mountains, and climbed up them, and down them. His strength grew less, but still he saw no village or house. Always he plodded onward toward the north. High above him, the stars gleamed. His feet stumbled, and his head grew dizzy with the heights. Stars seemed to shine deep in the valley too, as if there were another sky below him. He felt ill. More and more stars became visible below him. They glowed brighter and brighter and moved to and fro. Then he realized it was the lights of a little town that were shining down there. When he was sure of that, he put forth the last of his strength and finally reached the shelter of a humble inn. He remained there that night and the whole of the next day, for his body was in desperate need of rest and refreshment. The ice was beginning to thaw, and there was rain in the valley. But on the second morning, a man with a hand organ came to the inn and played a Danish melody. And now Knud could not remain. He resumed his journey northward, tramping on for many days, hurrying as though he were trying to reach home before all were dead there. But to no man did he speak of his longing, for no one would have believed in the sorrow of his spirit, the deepest a human heart can feel. Such grief is not for the world, for it is not amusing, nor is it for friends. And this man had no friends. A stranger, he wandered through strange lands toward his home in the north. He had received only one letter from home, and it was now years since his parents had written. "You are not really Danish, as we here at home. We love our country, but you love only a strange country." Thus his parents had written him. Yes, they thought they knew him. Now it was evening. He was tramping along the public highway. The frost had settled down, and the country had become flatter, with fields and meadows on all sides. And near the road there grew a great willow tree. The whole outlook reminded Knud strongly of home. It looked so Danish, and with a deep sigh he sat down under the tree. He was very tired. His head began to nod, and his eyes closed in slumber. But still he seemed to see the tree stretching its arms above him. And in his wandering fancy, the tree seemed to be a mighty old man, the Willow Father himself, carrying his tired son in his arms back to his Danish home, to the bare, bleak shore of Kyoga and the garden of his childhood. Yes, he dreamed that this was the willow tree of Kyoga that had traveled out into the world in search of him, and at last had found him, and had carried him back into the little garden beside the stream. And there stood Johanna in all her splendor, with the golden crown on her head, just as he had seen her last. And she called out, "Welcome," to him. And before him stood two remarkable figures, looking much more human than he remembered them from his childhood. They had changed too, but they were still the two gingerbread cakes, the man and the maiden, that turned their right sides toward him and looked very handsome. "We thank you," both said to Knud. "You have loosened our tongues and taught us that thoughts should be spoken freely, or nothing will come of them. And now something has come of them. We are betrothed." Then they walked hand in hand through the street of Koga, and looked very respectable even on the wrong side. No one could have found any fault with them. On they went, straight toward Kyoga Church, and Knud and Johanna followed them. They too walked hand in hand. The church stood there as it had always stood, with the beautiful green ivy growing on its red walls, and the great door of the church swung open, and the organ pealed, and the gingerbread couple walked up the aisle. "Our master first," said the cake pair, and made room for Johanna and Knud to kneel before the altar, and she bent her head over him, and the tears fell from her eyes. But they were icy cold, for it was the ice around her heart that was melting, softened by his strong love. The tears fell upon his burning cheeks, and then he awoke, and he was sitting under the old willow tree in a foreign land on that cold winter evening. An icy hail from the Kuds was beating on his face. "That was the most wonderful hour of my life," he cried. "And it was just a dream. Oh, God, let me dream again." Then he closed his eyes once more and dreamed again. Toward morning, there was a great snowstorm, and the wind blew it in drifts over him. And when the villagers came forth to go to church, they found a journeyman sitting by the roadside. He was dead, frozen to death beneath the willow tree. 5 peas from a pod. There were, once, 5 little peas, nestled snugly within a single green pod. Everything around them was green. The pod, the stalk, even the soft light that filtered through their tender walls. And so, in their small and happy world, they believed that all of creation must surely be green too. And, for them, it truly was. The pod swelled in the summer sun, rocking gently on its stem as warm winds brushed the field. The peas within it grew and dreamed, sitting in a straight row like brothers, shoulder to shoulder, content and curious about the life that was theirs. Outside, the sun's golden warmth poured down, while cool drops of rain washed the pod clean and made it glisten like emerald glass. Inside was peace, a soft cradle where light and darkness took turns like faithful watchmen. Days passed, seasons turned, and the peas grew larger, wiser, and more thoughtful. They began to wonder if there might be something beyond the pod, some grander mystery waiting outside their green shell. "Shall we always sit here?" one whispered, his voice round and mellow. "I fear I might grow hard if I stay too long in one place. I feel there must be something beyond, something vast, something calling to us." The others murmured in agreement, though none could truly imagine what lay outside. They only knew the gentle rocking, the hum of bees, and the soft glow that filled their home. Time flowed on. The pod grew older, and one morning, the peas awoke to find everything turned yellow. "The whole world is becoming yellow," they said. And since their world had always been what they saw, they were certain it was so. Then came a sharp tug. The pod shuddered, it was plucked from the vine. Human hands carried it away, and soon it lay in the pocket of a jacket, among other full, ripe buds. "Now something will happen," the peas whispered. "We shall be opened soon. Now we shall see who among us will go farthest," said the smallest pea, trembling with excitement. "Yes, now the great adventure begins." "Let happen what may," said the biggest, calm and brave. Crack! The pod burst open beneath a child's eager fingers, and 5 shining peas rolled out into the bright sunlight. They sparkled like jade beads in the little boy's hand. "Perfect peas for my pea shooter," he laughed. And in a moment, one was fitted into the barrel. "Now I'm flying into the great wide world," cried the first pea joyously. "Catch me if you can." And off it went, vanishing into the sky. "I'm going to the sun itself," shouted the second, proud and bold. "That must be the finest pod of all." Away it flew, its small heart full of daring. 2 others rolled upon the ground, dizzy and uncertain. "We'll lie wherever we land," they decided lazily. Sleep comes easily to peas. But even they were soon scooped up and sent flying after the others. "Let happen what may," said the last pea, humble and quiet. It was shot high and struck an old wooden board beneath a garret window. There, in a tiny crack filled with moss and soft dust, it came to rest. The moss closed gently around it like a green blanket. Forgotten by all, but not by heaven, the pea whispered softly, "Let happen what may." In that very garret lived a poor woman, strong of arm, weary of face, yet kind in heart. Each day she went out to scrub stoves, chop wood, and wash clothes, earning just enough to keep a small loaf on the table. In the narrow bed near the window lay her only child, a frail girl, pale as moonlight. For a year, she had been confined there, too weak to rise, hovering between life and death, like a candle flickering in the wind. "My sweet one will soon go to her little sister," the woman often said softly. "God once gave me 2, but he took one home. Perhaps he will not let them remain apart for long." Yet still the sick girl lingered, patient and quiet, her eyes calm as still water. One spring morning, when the air was fresh and full of birdsong, the mother opened the window to let in the sun. Light fell across the wooden floor and danced over the blanket. The girl gazed toward the lowest pane and said faintly, "Mother, what is that green thing peeping through the window. It moves when the wind breathes." The woman came closer and smiled in wonder. "Why, it's a little pea plant that has sprouted in the crack outside. Imagine that, child. It has found its way to you. Now you have your own tiny garden." The bed was drawn nearer so the girl could see the bright green leaves trembling in the sun. All that day she watched the little vine, and when evening came, she whispered, "Mother, I think I shall get well. The sun has been warm, and the pea is growing strong. I shall grow too, and see the sunshine with it." The mother smiled, though she did not truly believe, yet her heart felt lighter. She propped the tender stem with a stick so it would not break in the wind, and tied a string from the windowsill to the frame to guide its climb. Each day, it grew higher and greener, as though it heard the girl's prayers. "Look, it has a blossom," cried the woman one morning, and tears shone in her eyes. From that day, she believed her child would recover. Indeed, the girl's face grew rosier. She sat up by herself, gazing with bright eyes at her little pea garden. A week later, she could sit for hours, her thin hands folded, her heart swelling with joy. Outside the window bloomed a single delicate flower, pink as dawn. She bent and kissed it, and it seemed to her like a festival. "Our Lord himself planted the pea," said the mother, smiling through tears. "He made it grow to bring hope and healing to my blessed child." And what of the others? The first pea that cried, "Catch me if you can," had landed in a rooftop gutter and was swallowed by a pigeon. The two lazy peas shared the same fate, yet in feeding the birds, they had served a purpose after all. The proud one that boasted it would reach the sun fell too into a gutter, where it soaked in dirty rainwater until it swelled and burst. "I am magnificent," it declared. "No pea has ever grown so large. Surely I have gone farther than all." The gutter, full of filth and vanity, agreed completely. But high above them, at the humble garret window, the fifth pea stood green and strong, crowned with a blossom. Beside it, the once sick girl now stood upright, her cheeks touched with the blush of health, her hands folded in thanksgiving. She looked at the flower as one looks at a small miracle. The world outside still went on with its noise and rain and sorrow. But in that little room, there was sunlight, gratitude, and the quiet smile of faith. And in the mossy crack beneath the window, the pea that had whispered, "Let happen what may," had, in its own small way, changed a life. She was good for nothing. The mayor was standing at his open window. He was wearing a dress shirt with a dainty breastpin in its frill. He was very well shaven, self-done, though he had cut himself slightly and had stuck a small bit of newspaper over the cut. "Listen, youngster," he boomed. The youngster was none other than the washerwoman's son, who respectfully took off his cap as he passed. This cap was broken at the rim so that he could put it into his pocket. In his poor but clean and very neatly mended clothes and his heavy wooden shoes, the boy stood as respectfully as if he were before the king. "You're a good boy, a well-behaved lad," said the mayor. "I suppose your mother is washing down at the river, and no doubt you are going to bring her what you have in your pocket. That's an awful thing with your mother. How much have you there?" "A half pint," said the boy in a low, trembling voice. "And this morning she had the same?" continued the mayor. "No, it was yesterday," answered the boy. "Two halves make a whole. She is no good. It is sad there are such people. Tell your mother she ought to be ashamed of herself. Don't you become a drunkard, but I suppose you will. Poor child. Run along now." And the boy went, still holding his cap in his hand, while the wind rippled the waves of his yellow hair. He went down the street and through an alley to the river, where his mother stood at her washing stool in the water, beating the heavy linen with a wooden beater. The current was strong, for the mill's sluices were open. The bed sheet was dragged along by the stream and nearly swept away her washing stool. And the woman had all she could do to stand up against it. "I was almost carried away," she said. "It's a good thing you've come, for I need something to strengthen me. It's so cold in the water. I've been standing here for 6 hours. Have you brought me anything?" The boy drew forth a flask, and his mother put it to her lips and drank a little. "Oh, that does me good. How it warms me. It's just as good as hot food, and it isn't as expensive. Drink, my boy. You look so pale, and you're freezing in your thin clothes. Remember, it is autumn. Ooh, the water is cold. If only I don't get ill. But I won't. Give me a little more, and drink some yourself. But only a little drop, for you mustn't get used to it, my poor dear child." And she walked out of the water and up onto the bridge where the boy stood. The water dripped from the straw mat that she had tied around her waist and from her petticoat. "I work and slave till the blood runs out at my fingernails, but I do it gladly if I can bring you up honestly, my sweet child." Just then came an elderly woman, poorly clad, lame in one leg, and with an enormously large, false curl hanging down over one of her eyes. which was blind. This curl was supposed to hide the eye, but it only made the defect the more conspicuous. The neighbors called her Limping Maren with the curl, and she was an old friend of the washerwoman's. "You poor thing," she cried, "slaving and toiling in the cold water. You certainly need something to warm you a little, and yet the gossips cry about the few drops you take." And soon, all that the mayor had said to the boy was repeated to his mother, for Maren had overheard it, and it had angered her to hear him talk so to the child about his own mother and the few drops she took. Because on that same day, the mayor was having a big dinner party with many bottles of wine. Good wine, strong wine. Many will drink more than they should, but they don't call that drinking. They are all right, but you are good for nothing. What? Did the mayor really say that, child? Asked the laundress, her lips quivering. So you have a mother who is good for nothing. Perhaps he's right, though he shouldn't say so to a child. But I mustn't complain. Good things have come to me from that house. Why, yes, you were in service there when the mayor's parents were alive. That was many years ago. Many bushels of salt have been eaten since then, so people may well be thirsty, laughed Maren. The big dinner today at the mayor's would have been postponed if everything hadn't been prepared. I heard the news from the porter. A letter came an hour ago telling them that the mayor's younger brother in Copenhagen is dead. Dead! Cried the laundress, turning as white as a ghost. What does it matter to you? Said Maren. Of course, you must have known him since you worked in the house. Is he really dead? He was the best and kindest of men. Indeed, there aren't many like him. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. Oh my God, everything is going around. That's because I emptied the bottle. I couldn't stand so much. I feel so ill. And she leaned against the fence for support. Good heavens, you are ill indeed, said Maren. Try to get over it. No, you really are sick. I'd better get you home. But the washing there? I'll take care of that. Here, give me your arm. The boy can stay here and watch it till I come back and wash what's left. It's only a few pieces. The poor laundress's legs were trembling under her. I've stood too long in the cold water with no food since yesterday. I have a burning fever. Oh, dear Lord Jesus, help me to get home. Oh, my poor child. And she wept. The boy cried too, as he sat alone beside the river, guarding the wet linen. The two women made their way slowly, the washerwoman dragging her shaky limbs up the little alley and through the street where the mayor lived. Just as she reached the front of his house, she sank down on the cobblestones. A crowd gathered around her. Limping Maren ran into his yard for help. The mayor and his guests came to the windows. It's the washerwoman, he said. She's had a bit too too much to drink. She's no good. It's a pity for that handsome boy of hers. I really like that child. But his mother is good for nothing." And the washerwoman was brought to her own humble room, where she was put to bed. Kindly, Marin hastened to prepare a cup of warm ale with butter and sugar. She could think of no better medicine in such a case, and then returned to the river, where, although she meant well, she did a very poor job with the washing. She only pulled the wet clothes out of the water and put them into a basket. That evening, she appeared again in the washerwoman's miserable room. She had begged from the mayor's cook a couple of roasted potatoes and a fine, fat piece of ham for the sick woman. Marin and the boy feasted on these, but the patient was satisfied with the smell. "For that was very nourishing," she said. The boy was put to bed, in the same one in which his mother slept, lying crosswise at his mother's feet, with a blanket of old blue and red carpet ends sewed together. The laundress felt a little better now. The warm ale had given her strength, and the smell of the good food had been nourishing. "Thank you, my kind friend," she said to Marin. "I'll tell you all about it while the boy is asleep. He's sleeping already. See how sweet he looks with his eyes closed. He doesn't think of his mother's sufferings. May our Lord never let him feel their equal." Well, I was in service at the counselors, the mayor parents, when their youngest son came home from his studies. I was a carefree young girl then, but honest. I must say that before heaven. And the student was so pleasant and jolly. Every drop of blood in his veins was honest and true. A better young man never lived. He was a son of the house, and I was only a servant. But we became sweethearts, all honorably. A kiss is no sin, after all, if people really love each other. And he told his mother that he loved me. She was an angel in his eyes, wise and kind and loving. And when he went away again, he put his gold ring on my finger. After he had gone, my mistress called me in to speak to me. She looked so grave and yet so kind, and spoke as wisely as an angel indeed. She pointed out to me the gulf of difference, both mentally and materially, that lay between her son and me. Now he is attracted by your good looks, but that will fade in time. You haven't received his education. Intellectually, you can never rise to his level. I honor the poor, she continued, and I know that there is many a poor man who will sit in a higher seat in the kingdom of heaven than many a rich man. But that is no reason for crossing the barrier in this world. Left to yourselves, you too would drive your carriage full tilt against obstacles until it toppled over with you both. Now I know that Eric, the glove maker, a good, honest craftsman, wants to marry you. He is a well-to-do widower with no children. Think it over. Every word my mistress spoke went through my heart like a knife. But I knew she was right, and that weighed heavily upon me. I kissed her hand, and my bitter tears fell upon it. But still bitterer tears fell when I lay upon my bed in my own room. Oh, the long, dreary night that followed, our Lord alone knows how I suffered. Not until I went to church on Sunday did peace of mind come after my pain. It seemed the working of Providence that as I left the church, I met Eric himself. There were no doubts in my mind now. We were suited to each other, both in rank and in means. He was even a well-to-do man. So I went straight up to him, took his hand, and asked, "Do you still think of me?" "Yes, always and forever," he said. "Do you want to marry a girl who likes and respects you, but does not love you?" "I believe love will come," he said. And then we joined hands. I went home to my mistress. The gold ring that her son had given me, I had been wearing every day next to my heart, and every night on my finger in bed. But now I drew it out. I kissed it until my lips bled, then gave it to my mistress and told her that next week the banns would be read for me and the glove maker. My mistress took me in her arms and kissed me. She didn't say I was good for nothing, but at that time I was perhaps better than I am now, for I had not yet known the misfortunes of the world. The wedding was at Candlemas, and for our first year we were quite happy. My husband had a workman and an apprentice with him, and you, Marin, were our servant. "Oh, and such a good mistress you were," said Marin. "I shall never forget how kind you and your husband were to me." "Ah, but you were with us during our good times. We had no children then." I never saw the student again. Oh, yes, I saw him once, but he didn't see me. He came to his mother's funeral, and I saw him standing by her grave, looking so sad and pale. But that was all for his mother's sake. When his father died later, he was abroad and didn't come to that funeral. He didn't come here again. He became a lawyer, and he never married, I know. But he thought no more of me, and if he had seen me, he would certainly have never recognized me, ugly as I am now. And it is all for the best. Then she went on to tell of the bitter days of hardship, when misfortune had fallen upon them. They had saved $500, and since in their neighborhood a house could be bought for $200, they considered it a good investment to buy one, tear it down, and build again. So the house was bought, and the bricklayers and carpenters estimated that the new house would cost $1,020. Eric had credit and borrowed that sum in Copenhagen, but the captain who was to have brought the money was shipwrecked and the money lost. It was just then that my darling boy, who lies sleeping there, was born. Then his father had a long and severe illness, and for 9 months I even had to dress and undress him every day. We kept on going backward. We had to borrow more and more. One by one, all our possessions were sold, and at last Eric died. Since then, I have worked and slaved for the boy's sake, have gone out scrubbing floors and washing linen, done coarsework or fine, whatever I could get. But I was not to be better off. It is the Lord's will. He will take me away and find better provisions for my child. Then she fell asleep. In the morning, she seemed better and decided she was strong enough to return to her work. But the moment she felt the cold water, a shivering seized her. She grasped about convulsively with her hands, took one step forward, and fell. Her head lay on the dry bank, but her feet were in the water of the river. Her wooden shoes, in each of which there was a handful of straw, were carried away by the current. And here she was found by Maren, when she came to bring her some coffee. A message had come to her lodging that the mayor wanted to see her, for he had something to say to her. It was too late. A doctor was summoned. The poor washerwoman was dead. She has drunk herself to death, said the mayor. The letter that had brought the mayor the news of his brother's death also gave a summary of his will. And among other bequests, he had left $600 to the glovemaker's widow, who had formerly served his parents. The money was to be paid at discretion in large or small sums to her and her child. There was some nonsense about love between my brother and her, said the mayor. It's just as well she's out of the way. Now it will all come to the boy, and I'll place him with some honest people who will make him a good workman. And on these words, our Lord laid his blessings. And the mayor sent for the boy, promised to take care of him, and told him it was a lucky thing his mother was dead. She was good for nothing. They carried her to the churchyard, to a pauper's grave. Maren planted a little rose tree on her grave, while the boy stood beside her. My darling mother, he said, as the tears started from his eyes. Is it true that she was good for nothing? No, it is not true, said the old woman, looking up to heaven. I have known it for many years, and especially since the night before she died. I tell you, she was a good and fine woman, and our Lord in heaven will say so too. So let the world say, she was good for nothing. Two Maidens. Have you ever seen what road pavers call a maiden? I don't mean a young woman with ribbons in her hair, but that humble wooden creature that helps make the very streets we walk upon smooth and firm. She is made wholly of wood, broad and heavy at the base, bound with iron hoops to keep her strong. And at her upper, slender end runs a wooden handle like a pair of outstretched arms. Through those arms, the workmen guide her, and down she falls again and again, stamping the stones into the earth with patient rhythm. Such is the life of a maiden. In the tool shed behind the yard, 2 of these maidens once stood side by side among a company of shovels, measuring tapes, rakes, and wheelbarrows. The air smelled of tar and dust, and sunlight streamed faintly through the high windows, glimmering upon the polished handles and rusty spades. The 2 maidens had stood there for many a season, scarred by honest labor, proud of the work that had given them purpose. Yet lately, a rumor had begun to stir. A dreadful rumor, whispered first by the shovels and repeated by the wheelbarrow himself, that they were no longer to be called maidens at all. Some new rule, it was said, had been made among the pavers. From now on, their proper title was to be stamps, or more formally, hand rammers. It was the latest and supposedly most correct expression in the refined vocabulary of the trade. Now, among us humans, there are certain people, ladies chiefly, who call themselves emancipated. They are headmistresses and midwives, ballet dancers and milliners, nurses and teachers, women who wish to stand on equal footing with men. And in this same spirit of pride and self-respect, the 2 maidens of the yard considered themselves akin to these emancipated women. They would never, under any circumstance, surrender their good old name and be labeled with a title that turned them from persons into mere objects. Maiden is a human name, said the elder, with a firm knock against the floorboards. But a stamp or a hand rammer, that is a thing, a nameless tool, like a nail or a stone. I will not be a thing. That would be an insult to my dignity. My betrothed would end our engagement at once, cried the younger. She was engaged, as everyone knew, to a magnificent ramming block, a towering machine of iron and oak, who drove great stakes deep into the earth. His work was grander, heavier, but akin to hers, and she admired him with all the strength of her wooden heart. He fell in love with me as a maiden, she said. He will never love a stamp, and so I shall not let them change me. As for me, added the elder, with resolute pride, I would sooner have both my handles splintered and my iron bands broken than bear such a name. But the wheelbarrow, who prided himself on being quite the gentleman of the yard, rolled forward with a creak. "You two are behind the times," he said pompously. "It is very common to be called maidens. Too simple, too ordinary. Stamp sounds refined, official even. It belongs to the same family as seal, you see. Think of the royal signet, the seal of the state. That is a distinguished relation to have. Were I you, I would abandon the old name with gratitude." "Never," said the elder, shaking her head till her handle rattled. "I am too old to begin life anew under another name." "You do not understand what is called the European necessity," sighed the measuring tape, who fancied himself a philosopher. "We must all adapt to progress, my good friends. We must limit ourselves and conform to the age. If the law says a maiden shall henceforth be called a stamp, then a stamp she must be. There is a measure for everything, even for names." "Well," said the younger, with a sigh that made her joints creak, "if I must be something else, then I'd rather be called Miss. That at least sounds cousin to maiden." "I'd rather be chopped up for firewood and cast into the furnace," declared the old one fiercely. Soon the time for talk was over, for work awaited them. The maidens were loaded with ceremony into the wheelbarrow, which clattered down the yard to the street. The sun shone hot on the paving stones as they were set to their task. Yet when the foreman called them stamps, both shuddered. "Maid!" they cried, each time they struck the ground, the sound echoing like a heartbeat beneath the stones. "Maid!" But they never finished the word. They stopped themselves, remembering the decree. Still, in the secret language of their hearts, they spoke to each other as maidens, cherishing the memory of the good old days when names meant what they were meant to mean, and when a maiden was proud to be a maiden. In the end, their stubbornness cost them dearly. The mighty ramming block, that grand machine of which the younger had once dreamed, broke off their engagement entirely. "I cannot ally myself," he declared coldly, "with a stamp or a hand rammer." And thus she was left alone, a maiden in spirit. Though condemned by the world to bear a new name she despised, yet both remained steadfast to the last, standing side by side in the shed long after the others had worn out or rusted away. For though their labels changed, their hearts of wood were true, and in that steadfastness lay all their dignity. The last pearl. There once stood a great house filled with warmth and joy. Its walls glowed softly beneath the evening lamps, and every chamber echoed with the quiet laughter of contented hearts. The owners were happy, the servants cheerful, the friends rejoicing. For on that day, a son and heir had been born. The mother rested peacefully, the child lay safe in her arms, and every soul under that roof breathed gratitude and delight. The small lamp in the mother's chamber had been dimmed, its shade half drawn, so the light fell only as a gentle glow. Heavy curtains of silken fabric, soft as moonlight, were pulled close before the windows. The thick carpet yielded beneath one's feet like moss in a quiet forest. All within the room whispered of calm and rest. Even the nurse, sitting beside the cradle, felt the peace that reigned there. Her eyes closed, and she too drifted into slumber. For all was well, and heaven's blessing had descended upon the home. At the head of the bed stood the guardian spirit of the house. Over the newborn child it bent, spreading a veil woven of glimmering starlight. The veil shimmered with countless pearls, and each pearl was a token of good fortune, health, happiness, beauty, love, and long life. Around the cradle, unseen by mortal eyes, the good fairies of life had gathered, whispering their blessings. The air was thick with promise, the silence radiant with invisible song. All that the world can give has been granted here, murmured the guardian spirit, gazing in wonder at the sleeping child. But from beside the bed, a soft voice answered, gentle yet solemn. It was the voice of the child's good angel. No, said the angel, not all. One fairy has not yet brought her gift. Her blessing is the last, and though she may tarry, she will come. The wreath of fortune is not yet complete. The final pearl is still missing. Missing? Cried the guardian spirit. Then we must not rest until we find it. Tell me who this fairy is, and I shall fly to her and beg for her gift. She will come, replied the angel quietly. Even if many years must pass, she will not forget. For without her, no life is truly crowned. Yet if you wish to seek her, I will guide you to where she may be found. She dwells nowhere and everywhere. She visits the palace of the king and the cottage of the poor. She enters uninvited, yet leaves behind a treasure more enduring than gold. She touches all lives, whether they welcome her or not. Then lead me, said the spirit. Let us go to her and bring back the missing pearl. So the two, radiant and unseen, soared hand in hand through the night. They passed over glittering cities, over quiet villages and lonely fields, until at last they came to a great house wrapped in silence. The halls were dark and echoing. The rooms stood empty. Only the long white curtains trembled softly in the wind that swept through open windows. In the middle of the wide chamber stood an open coffin. Within it lay a woman, still young, with beauty untouched by death. Fresh roses had been laid upon her breast, their fragrance mingling with the solemn stillness. Her hands, folded gently, seemed as if they might yet move to bless her children once more. Her face was calm and noble, lit with a quiet glory, the peace of one who had entered into the mysteries of God. Beside the coffin stood her husband and their children, a circle of grief. The father held the youngest child in his arms, while the older ones clung silently to his garments. He took the lifeless hand in his own, a hand once warm with love and labor, now cold and still, and pressed it to his lips. No word was spoken. Their sorrow was too deep for speech. Tears fell heavily onto the floor, echoing in the stillness like raindrops in a tomb. Then, with bowed heads and breaking hearts, they turned away and left her. A single candle burned beside the coffin. Its flame trembled in the draught, stretching upward like a thin red tongue that fought against the wind. Strangers entered then, solemn and silent men. They closed the lid, sealed the coffin with nails, and the sound of hammering rang through the desolate house, through every heart that loved her. The guardian spirit shuddered. "Why have you brought me here?" it asked. "Surely no fairy of blessing could dwell in such a place of death." The angel laid a gentle hand upon the spirit's arm and pointed toward a shadowed corner of the room. "She is here," said the angel, "here, in this sacred hour." The spirit turned and beheld a woman seated where once the mother had sat in life, among flowers, books, and pictures, where her laughter had filled the air. But this new figure was robed in garments heavy and dark, her face veiled, her hands folded upon her knees. Around her there was no light, only a trembling sorrow that seemed to breathe. It was sorrow herself. She had come to dwell where love had reigned, to rule where joy had once been queen. A single tear slid from her eyes and fell into her lap. There it hardened into a radiant pearl, glowing with the 7 colors of the rainbow. The angel caught it, and it shone like a star of many fires. "The pearl of sorrow," whispered the angel, holding it aloft, "is the last and greatest of all gifts. It completes the circle and binds the crown together. Without it, no life is whole, no heart is wise. Through it, all other blessings gain their depth and splendor, for only they who have wept may truly rejoice. Behold, it gleams with the colors of the rainbow, the bridge between earth and heaven. When one whom we love departs, the heart breaks, yet it also opens. In the place of each who is taken from us, there is given one friend more to await us in eternity. Thus, even grief becomes grace, even loss becomes hope. "Look upon this pearl," said the angel, "and remember, within it are hidden the wings of the soul, the wings of Psyche that bear us upward beyond the stars, away from pain, toward peace." And the guardian spirit bowed in reverence, for it understood that the pearl of sorrow was, indeed, the crowning jewel of all life's gifts.